Case number 12 CR 1522, the record should reflect that Mr. Holmes is present with his attorneys and the prosecutors are present as well. So it's 10:25. How much longer do you have on that disc, Mr. Brockler?
2 hours and 12 minutes, Your Honor.
I think that's a little long to go. So I think let's just break at 12 and then we'll play the rest of it after lunch.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. And then, Mr. King, you can start your cross-examination after Mr. Brockler finishes whatever questioning he has in the afternoon.
Your Honor, and I, just for the record, I've given Mr. Brockler some DVDs which are clips of the video examination that I've extracted. That there's no change to the content at all. I've just selected out some 25 or so clips, which I may play with Dr. Reed or not. I'm not sure, but I provided them to him so he can take a look at them if he wishes to.
All right. Thank you for doing that. All right. Let's bring the jury in, please.
And just to clarify, Your Honor, on that, there are 32, it appears, separate discs.
Actually, they're not. There were 32, and I pulled some of them out. I think there are about 25 in there.
About
now.
25.
I'm not quite sure.
All right. Mr. Brockler, are you still okay taking 1 hour for lunch, or are you asking for more time to look at those? It sounds like they're all from the videotape that we've been watching, right? Or the videotapes we've been watching, right?
They're all short clips between 20 seconds and a couple of 2-3 minutes that are taken directly from People's Exhibit that's already been admitted and played in full or will have been at the end of the direct examination. They're just clips, little clips taken from that for ease of use, Judge, so that we wouldn't have to try to find the location in the longer video. We can just put these in and show them to him very quickly, as opposed to trying to locate exactly where in the longer exhibit they are.
I appreciate you doing that. Mr. Brockler, are you still okay with 1 hour for lunch?
Yes, sir, I am. Frankly, I think that it would be impossible for them to come up with a clip from this exchange that we haven't seen, so, I mean, I trust Mr. King.
Okay, thank you. Please be seated, everyone. The record should reflect that the jury has joined us again. Welcome back, folks. I'm told that there are about 2 hours and 12 minutes left on this video recording, and so what we're going to do is just go to until about 12 and take our lunch break at that point. Remember that today is a day when we're only taking 1 hour for lunch, and then we'll proceed with the rest of the exhibit after the lunch break. Before the prosecution resumes playing Exhibit P-TR-1011, let me remind you, folks, that the defendant's statements on this video recording have been admitted only for a limited purpose. You may consider the defendant's statements on this video recording only as to the issues raised by his plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. You shall not consider them for any other purpose. Dr. Reed's statements on this video recording may only be considered for the limited purpose of allowing you to evaluate the reliability of his examination and to provide context to the statements made in the video recording by the defendant. You shall not consider any statements, including questions made by Dr. Reed on this video recording, for the truth of their content or for any other purpose. All right, with that, Mr. Brockler, you may proceed with the playing of the next part of Exhibit P-TR-1011. And I'm going to dim the lights.
I'd like to talk just a little bit more about the thoughts that you were under surveillance when you were planning things and ordering weapons and going to Byers Canyon, etc. You used the phrase, or one reason that you thought you were under surveillance was that you were going to commit a crime.
Right, I think if you're doing something illegal, you probably become more aware of police around you.
At the time, not as you think about it now, with perhaps a bit clearer head, at the time, do you think you were just hypersensitized because you were planning a crime, to use your word? Or do you think you were...
I think there was some paranoia.
And tell me what you mean by paranoia.
Imagining like, people were after me when they weren't.
Imagining means to me sort of a thought about something. Somewhere out on maybe the same spectrum, there's the deep, true belief that they're after you or watching you. Can you pinpoint a little bit for me on that spectrum where you were with that back in?
A little bit more moderate than deep-seated.
I'm sorry?
Than deep-seated.
A little more moderate than deep-seated.
Yeah.
Did you do anything to combat the possibility of surveillance?
I closed all the blinds in my apartment.
Anything else?
No,
Did you keep the blinds closed all the time or close them some of the time?
all the time.
And by closed, the blinds are down and the slats are...
So nobody can see it.
Okay. When, for example, did you do the dark tinting on your car windows?
Well, I bought the stuff before I bought the window tinting before I installed it, like a week or so before.
And did the idea have to do with preparation for the mission, or did you just like tinted windows?
It was in case anybody walked out in back of the theater, so they wouldn't see.
So it was specifically about the mission itself, not about what you might have been carrying in the back seat in the weeks before the mission.
Right, I didn't install the window tint until like just before the mission.
Okay. Any other things that you did that were to combat the idea of surveillance?
No.
I think you mentioned that in your web searches, your online purchases and things, you used your real name, your real credit card. You didn't use a proxy server. Is that right?
Right.
You know what I mean by a proxy server?
Just another server that kind of would mask the server I was using.
Yeah. A way to mask your identity on the web. Did you ever see around your building, for example, cars that you thought might be there to observe you, or FBI, or law enforcement?
I saw law enforcement, but there's a bar like right across the street. And
Did there ever come a time when you were pretty sure that the car was there for you and not for the bar?
once or twice, but it was an unmarked vehicle. It's just like,
When you say an unmarked vehicle?
yeah, it wasn't your typical cruiser. It was like all black.
Kind of a Crown Victoria with spotlights or something?
Something
Something
like
that really looked like an unmarked vehicle, or something that you, looking back on it, may have imagined was an unmarked vehicle?
Something that I imagined was.
Looking back, are you pretty sure it really was an unmarked vehicle or not?
I'm not sure anymore.
Okay. Where were those cars parked on those one or two occasions that you described?
Across the street.
Across the street. Relative to your apartment, would that be a good place to observe or not? Or more logical to think of it as with the bar? Or
I think he was trying to get drunk drivers from the bar.
I probably asked this as well, but you use Byers Canyon as a place to practice,
Right.
and it's 2.5 hour drive.
Well, 2 hours at the rate I drive.
Okay. Any particular reason that you wanted something that far away?
No, I went to it mainly because it was unsupervised.
Okay, and I remember you mentioning that. When you were firing the weapons, I've asked you before, and I'd like to ask you again, actually. What was the feeling when you first fired the weapons there, later on when you fired the weapons? How did it feel to shoot those weapons?
It felt routine.
Routine?
Yeah.
Even the first time?
Yeah. There wasn't any special emotions attached to it.
You fired lots and lots and lots of rounds.
Right.
I mean, really thousands of rounds.
Yeah.
Unless you were there for many, many hours, you probably fired, at least some of the time, very rapidly. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Yeah.
As you're firing the rounds, what position were you in? What physical position were you in?
Standing up.
Always standing?
Well, I tried crouching a couple times just to mix it up.
Did you ever fire them while you were moving, while you were running or walking?
Yeah, I would move side to side and shoot at the target.
Do you recall making any noises when you did that?
No, I didn't make any noise.
Yelling or screaming or saying, take that, or
No, nothing
gotcha,
like
or
that.
anything like that?
No. It's just a paper target, so.
You raise another interesting point. You were shooting at paper targets. They were body mass targets, I think, right? Life-size silhouettes or not?
They were close to, like the life size scene.
When you did that, do you recall ever imagining that they weren't paper targets?
No, I strictly knew they were paper targets.
I need to take a quick break. I'm
Okay.
going to ask the gentleman to come in while I go to the restroom, if that's all right with you. Let's see if I can get his attention. Stop it for just a sec. My coffee's catching up with me, guys. I need to step in. Okay. Appreciate that break. Let me take your pulse once more, man. Thanks. Okay. Any questions about anything we talked about before that?
Nope.
No break. continuing then to kind of go through some of the things that I thought about after our last meeting. We've talked a bit about reasons, motivations for the shooting, and really for the whole process that happened before the shooting, the shooting itself. We talked about the clear expectation that one way or another you would be controlled when the shooting occurred, after the shooting occurred. And the likelihood that you'd be in a situation such as you are right now. We've talked a little less about the idea of being remembered. I remember we looked at some photographs. We talked about your thoughts of posting something with the New York Times. Talk with me about, again, being remembered if you can.
Well, that's just what the photographs were for, is to be remembered.
Can you talk with me again about how you believe you'll be remembered?
There's not so much a for or how reason. It's just, this is a photograph of me, and that is what will be remembered.
Going back to July of 2012, I remember you and I looking at the various photographs together, and you're talking about what they might mean and how people might interpret them as they remember you or simply interpret the photographs. What were some of the things that you remember came up in our discussion?
That it was devil-like.
Okay, one of them was kind of devil-like. Okay. What else?
That's the only one I remember.
I remember you're talking about being a dangerous person.
Right, it kind of portrayed a dangerous quality to it.
Tell me about being remembered as dangerous, and particularly as you might have thought about it a couple of years ago.
Just that this isn't someone you want to mess with.
What does that bring to mind?
I'm not sure.
The first time you bought a gun, actually your first purchase was a taser. Taser, no. You talked about defensive thoughts rather than offensive thoughts.
Yeah.
You're in a position, in a situation now that have in another way something to do with not wanting to be messed with. And we talked about fantasies that you might be killed.
Right, yeah.
But I'm really referring to back in June, July of 2012. What kind of a person doesn't get messed with?
Tough guy.
How does that fit with you?
Well, they were kind of frightening pictures.
How does that fit with you, Jimmy Holmes?
It's unusual because I'm not normally a tough guy.
Go ahead.
I don't know what else to say.
get you off the hook with springs. So
Yes.
we just remain silent until you say something. I may not do that to you here, but that you're not a tough guy.
Not normally a tough guy.
Not normally a tough guy. In what context or situation are you a tough guy?
In the context of the shooting,
Pretty tough guy during the shooting.
yeah.
Talk to me about the tough guy during the shooting.
Well, I'm all decked out in body armor and weapons, so it gives off a tough essence.
Okay. Do you remember it feeling tough? Feeling like a tough guy?
No, not really.
Do you remember before the shootings it feeling like a tough guy or anticipating being a tough guy?
A little.
Tell me what you remember about that.
Just in taking the pictures, they look different from what I normally look like.
And different in the sense of,
Having the hair dyed and the contact possession lenses. And
the regalia is real clear to me as real, in the room, tough guy stuff. The contacts, particularly with the name of the contacts, possession contact lenses, and to some extent the hair, says to me something different from solid, I can reach out and touch the tough. Does that make any sense?
a little,
What are the possession lenses, or what they represent, or what they felt like, better yet? What they felt like. What does that have to do with tough guy or not tough guy, or with something else?
I'm not sure.
What comes to mind?
Just that it would be frightening to whoever saw it.
Did anybody ever see you with the contacts on?
No, only through the photos.
Only through the phone. And it would be frightening to whoever saw it.
Yeah.
Frightening in what way?
In a frightening way.
Possession brings to mind, to me anyway, occult, mysterious. The armor, on the other hand, brings to mind physical, tough, can't get through it.
So yeah, the lenses are more psychological toughness.
Okay. Where does the hair fit in? Or was it just a fluke, kind of, I'd like to dye my hair, I want to change things?
Yeah, I didn't really have a reason for dyeing my hair.
Looking back on it, when Ben dyed his hair, he says, I just wanted to change it. He's dyed his hair many times, he said. Was that close to your concept of dyeing your hair, or was that quite different, so far as you can recall, from the reason that you dyed your hair?
Well, it certainly was a change because I never dyed my hair before.
Do you remember having anything in mind about dyeing it or about the color itself?
Well, red suggests bravery.
Okay. Is the James Holmes of 2010, 2011, early 2012 a brave guy?
Yeah.
How were you at that time a brave guy?
Well, I was moving to a new state in a new area.
I'm sorry.
I was moving to a new state, and I was doing new things.
And that takes some courage.
Rather than just doing what you always do.
Was the James or the Jimmy Holmes of 2010, 2011, early 2012 a frightened guy, a scared guy? When Hillary's screen was cut, that was May, something like that. It was well after you had started to prepare these things, or no?
When Hillary screamed? What are you referring to?
Somebody tried to break into her place.
Oh, okay, yeah. Like they cut it with a knife.
Okay. I think I remember the timing, the chronology of things.
That was before I bought the first handgun.
Okay. You had bought the taser and the knife, but not the handgun. Is that your memory?
I'm not sure when I bought the taser and knife.
But they were before the handgun, right?
Yes.
Okay. Did her being broken into, or attempted breaking, apparently attempted breaking, did that scare you with regard to your safety?
It motivated me to be more prepared and set up a defense.
When that occurred, once again, I'm trying to get the timeline straight in my mind. Was that around the time you guys, the short period in which you guys dated and hung out together? Or was that before you started hanging out together for a short time?
I don't remember the context and when I heard it.
Okay. But what you just said was you did feel like creating some sort of perimeter, some sort of doing something to make things more safe for yourself. Is
Yeah.
that fair to say? Okay. Do you remember about the time that doing the defensive things began to morph into doing the offensive things, or were they completely separate?
Well, once I bought the shotgun, it was an offensive thing.
So you said once you bought the shotgun. How about before you bought the shotgun, when you
It was still defensive.
decided to go get it?
Oh, when I decided to go get it, it was an offensive
It
thing.
was going to be an offensive one. We talked a bit at SimHip about some of the people in your family that have passed away. Not very many folks have. I think both your grandfathers. Am I right?
And grandmothers.
Can you talk a little more about the death, for some reason I have circled your mom's father who passed away when you were little, I think, correct?
Yeah.
Do you remember very much about interacting with him?
No, not very. I was little.
Doing things with him?
I think he like played the piano together once.
What did he look like?
Barrel chested, average height.
Nice guy.
Yeah,
And you played the piano once together.
I think so.
Did you learn to play the piano when you were a kid?
I took lessons, yeah.
Did he play the piano?
He had a piano, so I assumed he played.
Do you know anything about him beyond that? What he was like? What he enjoyed doing?
No, I was too young.
Have you learned anything about that as you grew?
Oh, no.
Are you curious about your grandfather or your other grandparents?
Well, they're gone now, so it's not
Are you
much.
curious about their lives at all?
Not really.
And once again, you said not really. That's kind of got a little caveat in it. So, to what extent are you curious, or do you mean no? I'm not curious about my grandparents' lives.
Well, I have a little bit of curiosity.
Do you have any thoughts about any of them that they may have been, or wonder if they were people who did bad things, killed people, broke the law, beat their wives?
No, they never did any of that stuff.
Do you have any fantasies or thoughts that they might have, or concerns that they might have done bad things?
No.
How about your parents? Mother and dad, any concerns that they've done bad things in the past?
No, they haven't. At least that they told me they haven't.
You talked a little about your Aunt Betty. And I haven't talked with her. Tell me more about Aunt Betty and the way she looks to you, or what you've done with her, or watched her do.
Well, we spend Thanksgivings up in Santa Cruz where she lives. And she's friendly, very quiet.
Anything else about Aunt Betty, or things that you may have done or observed about her?
Nope.
You mentioned that you think she may be schizophrenic, or she is schizophrenic, or something like that.
I think I found that out when my parents told me, either when I was in jail or just before. Maybe, well, not just before, but like a year within.
Any idea what medications she takes?
And I don't know.
mentioned that the offensive thoughts about the weapons came before you got the shotgun. That is, you got the shotgun with offensive thoughts, not defensive thoughts.
Right.
As far as you recall, was it just offensive thoughts, or was it also a defensive weapon?
I think it was both.
One of the things I asked a few minutes ago was, were the defensive purposes of doing things, safe perimeter, the taser, etc., did those somehow evolve or develop into an offensive purpose, or were the defensive and offensive separate? Don't think I heard you say whether or not they were separate.
So are you saying the defensive morphed into offensive?
I'm saying I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
Did it morph along some spectrum, or are they two separate concepts?
I think it morphed.
Can you tell me what you think happened or how that morphing took place?
Well, my planning got more deliberate.
What else?
I got committed to the mission.
You got committed to the mission. One doesn't get committed to something until the thing exists, that is, until the mission exists. When did the mission come up?
When I bought the shotgun,
When you bought it, in anticipation of buying it, the mission was there and you decided to buy it. What was the order there, if you recall?
the mission got real, and then I decided to go buy the shotgun.
Okay. The mission got real and you decided to buy the shotgun. What do you recall about the way in which the mission got real? The situation, the general time, how did the mission get real? If I were watching something evolve into something else, can you picture that for me?
Well, I just started having realistic thoughts of a group of people getting killed instead of mankind getting killed.
Okay. A group of people, realistic thoughts about a group of people getting killed instead of mankind getting killed. Let me start with the realistic. Had you had less realistic thoughts or abstract thoughts about a group of people being killed prior to that? Or no?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'll take a little note here so I don't forget. Can you think back to roughly when or how the less realistic thought of a group being killed appeared?
Like early teens.
Late teens? Did that less realistic kind of thinking about a group being killed continue from your teens up until it became more realistic? Or was there a break in there? Was it relatively continuous?
It was continuous.
Okay. Then at some point, sounds like in early 2012, those thoughts became, in your words, realistic. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Can you describe the realisticness of those thoughts?
Well, it was a small group instead of like everybody. So
A small group as opposed to annihilation? Is that what you mean?
as
Or-
opposed to annihilation of everybody.
Okay. At that time, do you recall picturing what that group might have been like in your mind? Where they were, what they looked like? What was happening to them?
No, it was just a crowd.
Just a crowd. Any idea where the crowd was?
Not at that point. No,
What they looked like? What they were doing?
no, they were just a crowd.
Were they moving around or sitting down? Standing up?
I don't remember.
Okay. And if you don't remember, that's just fine. Moving toward you, moving away from you.
I don't know.
Do you recall whether or not the crowd was threatening to you in any way?
No, I don't believe so.
So something coalesced into being a realistic thought of a group killing, not mankind being killed.
Right.
I'm not sure I've asked you this before. Did you ever have relatively concrete thoughts about actually annihilating mankind?
No, they were just an abstract thing that would pop up.
We talked at SimHip about the word mission, and that the concept of the mission arose out of you, not from somebody else.
Yeah, it was internal.
Okay. Not from some external voice or thought or suggestion. If I'm
Correct, yeah.
remembering correctly, okay. And you said it's like I was obligated to do it. That there was no other alternative. I asked you at the time about the possibility of other alternatives, and I'd like to hear about that again. There was no other alternative.
Well, that worked. There was therapy, but it didn't work.
That's a pretty dichotomous alternative. Kill lots of people, go to therapy. Is it, what other things might one try? Not necessarily you, but what other things might one consider in order to, well, one of the things you talk about is deal with the depression, your suicide feelings that you believed you had. What other alternatives might someone think about in addition to killing lots of people and going to therapy?
Going to therapy to remove those killing thoughts.
What other alternatives might someone consider?
Discussing it with friends.
Okay. Anything else?
No.
Does that seem to you a pretty black and white way of viewing it?
What do you mean?
If I'm hungry, I guess I could say I have no alternative except to go to the Dairy Queen and get a hamburger.
But you do have other
But
alternatives.
there are many alternatives.
Okay.
Some of them are close. I can go to Burger King rather than Dairy Queen. Some of them are a little more variety. I can get a hamburger, I can get a candy bar, or I can have a salad. And some of them are even more varied. I can tolerate my hunger.
I guess I just didn't think of any alternatives at the time.
And what do you make of that you didn't think of any, or you guess you didn't think of any alternatives at the time? Because once again, you're a smart guy.
I guess because it was so absorbing that it felt like it was the only thing to do.
So absorbing that you felt like it was the only thing to do. And what would happen if you resisted and didn't do it?
Then I would have to suicide.
You've said several times that that's your interpretation now, that you would have had suicide if you resisted. But you've also said several times that you weren't aware, consciously, that you were suicidal at that time.
What time is this?
Before the shooting.
I think that's inaccurate. I was aware I was suicidal.
Okay. Can you, and I want to be accurate, so thanks for correcting. Can you refresh me then about times or indications that you knew that you were suicidal? And it wasn't something that you weren't aware of, was it? That you knew that you were in danger of killing yourself?
Well, the thing was I would automatically transfer to homicidal thoughts. So
That
then I wasn't aware of the suicidal thought.
Okay. And what I'm asking of you is, can you recall or describe any point at which you were aware of the suicidal thoughts?
Oh, when I was severely depressed.
And about when would that have been?
I don't remember.
Before the shooting or after the shooting?
Before the shooting.
Okay. Do you recall ever formulating a plan to kill yourself?
Just downing a bunch of pills.
Do you remember thinking about that as a possible plan before the shooting?
Yeah.
Tell me about that time and those thoughts.
I don't know.
But you just brought it up as if you did know.
What's the question?
Is it tough for you to follow this particular topic?
My timeline's all messed up.
Okay. We're not really talking about a timeline right now. We're talking about the topic of whether or not you were aware of being suicidal before the killings. I think this is the first time you've ever told me that you had thoughts of taking a bunch of pills.
It wasn't serious though.
Do you remember the context or how serious or not serious it was at the time?
it was not serious enough to actually take any of the pills.
Do you remember roughly when this was? Around the time of the killing, months before, years before?
I don't know the timeline.
Okay. Could it have been years before? Or is that very unlikely?
I think that's unlikely.
Could it have been within weeks of the killing? Or is that unlikely?
I think it's within months.
Okay. And I understand that you're estimating. I understand that you're not aware right now of whatever the exact time is. But the real point is whether or not and how much you were aware that part of you wanted to die. Tell me more about any awareness that you had that you or part of you wanted to die prior to the shootings.
Well, it goes back to not having a purpose in life.
Okay. Go ahead.
So I figured if there was no purpose, there was no reason to live.
It sounds like this is in the last quarter of school.
I think
Give or
so,
take.
yeah.
Do you remember having thoughts of ending your life during that time?
Just taking the pills.
Taking the pills. Do you recall whether those would have been the pills that had been prescribed by Dr. Fenton, the pills that were available in the medicine cabinet?
Yeah.
Or some other pills?
Those pills.
Those pills. Okay. Any other thoughts about ways to kill yourself or thoughts of killing yourself besides that?
No.
Do you think some may have been there that you're not recalling or thinking of right now?
I don't think so, no.
Okay. And the way you've described the thoughts about pills is you thought about it, but not seriously enough
To try it.
to try it. Do you remember contemplating what it might have been like to take the pills?
Thought it wouldn't be painful or anything.
What stopped you? What do you think may have stopped you from giving that a try?
The mission itself.
The mission itself. That kind of takes us back to your statement earlier that the mission, at least in some ways, was to save your life.
Right.
Or
One of the reasons.
one of the purposes of the mission. Okay. I interrupted you, I'm sorry.
Well, just one of the reasons was
And the others, I know we're getting repetitive, but I like repetition.
to increase the value.
The others to increase the value. Any others?
Hatred of mankind.
Once again, that's a third one that's kind of sounds like a distant third, but I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, that was very little reason why.
Do you suppose the hatred of mankind helped you to discount the value of the people that you killed? That is, hating them made it easier to kill them for your purpose? Or hating mankind, rather, made it easier to kill some of them, some of mankind, for the other purposes you had?
No, I don't think so.
That may have been kind of an obtuse question. But I'm wondering if the hatred offered a way to justify killing people in order to help yourself.
I didn't use it as a justification.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about your friends that had kind of dropped away by June and July particularly of 2012. When we talked a couple of weeks ago, you said that they had been your friends for months and you were sad to see them go.
Yeah.
At that point, I said that, well, they didn't really go. You dismissed them.
Right.
You then said that it was sort of a mutual abandonment. You abandoned them, they abandoned you. Abandon was your word. And I asked, how did they abandon you? Because it sounded to me like you cut yourself off from them, not the other way around.
I did that and they didn't respond back.
Were they supposed to respond back? Or did you hope they would respond back?
No.
So is it fair to say that you're the one that opted out? Or is it fair to say
I
that
think
it was
that's
mutual?
fair. Yeah. That I opted out.
Okay. And the second part of my question was an or that it was mutual.
Well, it's mutual because they didn't come back and try and restart the friendship.
Actually, Ben did try to recontact you, didn't he? He did recontact you, at least for a bit, and you had a conversation, a text conversation with him, I think.
I don't recall.
Maybe I'm mistaken. I get the timeline confused sometimes. You said that they stopped inviting you to activities. Is it fair to say that that was because you indicated to them that you didn't want to be invited to activities, or is that not fair to say?
I think that'd be fair to say.
You also mentioned, and we talked briefly about whether or not you're breaking up with Gargi. You made them no longer connect with you. Let me say that a different way. If Gargi had been part of the group, my picture in my mind is that you come to the group in part because of your connection with Gargi, but not entirely. And then when your connection with Gargi breaks up,
I end the connection with my other friend.
the group then moves away with Gargi in it.
Yeah.
That's sort of an odd picture I have in my mind. And maybe that's not exactly what the picture is in your mind.
I kind of distinguish myself from the group.
Was being alone more comfortable for you than being with that group?
No, I liked being with the group.
Then the cutting yourself off from the group was for the purpose of?
It would be too painful with being around Gargi again.
Okay. Because Gargi would have been part of the group in general.
Right.
have anything to do with your wanting to focus time and attention on the mission rather than other things? Or could you do that with the group there anyway?
I don't think that was a reason for abandoning the group.
Okay. After you had lots of weapons, did anyone come over to your house, to your apartment, who might have noticed all the weapons and things that you bought?
No, I was pretty much alone.
Now, Mr. Lee,
Came over when I had the first handgun and nothing else.
okay, so there wasn't a whole lot of armament and material in the apartment when he came over.
Is it Lee or is it Yom Pew? Because there's two. It was one young Luke Lee, who was my instructor in the third rotation, and then the other guy was a neuroscience student.
I think it was a student, as I'm remembering, looking at the record. Whoever it was did come to your home and
That would be
showed you your
Yom.
gun. Okay. And his name was
Yom Pew, I think.
Young Q.
Pew? I don't know. I'm not
And
sure.
his last name wasn't Lee.
No, I think that was another guy.
Okay. I'm with you. We talked at one point about the mission coming to you. And I asked if you spent much time trying to figure out where the mission might be coming from. You said that it came from within you, but to figure out more about the mission. And your comment was that you just kind of accepted it. You accepted the mission. Kind of matter-of-factly.
Right.
You then made the comment that when you accepted it, you didn't think the mission was all that serious. You remember saying that or feeling that way?
I don't remember it.
Early on, it was after you had bought the Glock, the time you were describing, the first Glock. You said, and your words were, I think it's a quote, that you didn't think the mission was all that serious about that. What does that suggest to you, or anything at all?
That it kind of progressed steadily over time.
You said fairly soon after that that you didn't think the consequences through. And I said, which consequences? And you said that I would complete the mission. At that early time, do you recall sitting here, not really thinking about completing the whole mission around the time that the mission sort of seemed to be forming and you weren't taking it all that seriously? Or you didn't think it was all that serious? Is that what you
Yeah, because around the time I bought the first gun, it was still defensive. It wasn't offensive yet until later.
But the first gun was a shotgun.
First gun was a handgun.
Okay, beg your pardon. first Glock
Yeah.
was the Life 22, was it? Okay, the shotgun was the second gun?
Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying. See if I can keep everything straight here. I think you said that you had never fired a gun before you ordered these weapons. Is that right?
I fired like a paintball gun, but no like firearm.
Okay. Which was the very first one that you fired? Of the guns that you bought?
It was either the handgun or the assault rifle.
That would have been out at Byers, or
Out at Byers.
Byers was the only
That was the only
place?
place I shot them, except for the shooting.
So, the Glock 22, next was the shotgun, next was the second Glock, or the AR?
The AR.
The AR, and then the second Glock.
Right.
No other weapons were purchased, I don't believe, or no more firearms.
Right.
Do you think that you didn't fire any of them until you had the AR?
That depends on when the ammunition came in. Because I think I started buying the ammunition after I bought the AR.
Okay. Did you purchase any ammunition locally?
Like a cartridge or a box of shotgun shells.
Okay. And I guess what I'm trying to understand is the first time you went to Byers, how many of the weapons did you have? A lot of them, or just a couple?
All of them, I would say.
All of them. So you had all or nearly all the weapons before you fired any of them.
Right.
I asked briefly about your thoughts the day before the shootings, the day before that, when you started putting together the napalm and things like that. And I asked whether you had any thoughts as you went to sleep that night. That would have been the night of the 18th, I guess.
Well, there wasn't anything dangerous set up at that time.
And we talked about there was gasoline, but you had the caps on the bottles and
Right.
things like that. I guess I'm thinking about thoughts you may have had about the mission or about the shooting.
No, it was kind of just another day.
You have lots of regalia around you. And you're not thinking about it or your shooting or preparation.
Just that I was going to have to assemble the incendiary devices the next day.
In general, around that time, how did you get to sleep? Some people read themselves to sleep. Some people just go to bed and close their eyes.
That's
So-
what I do.
That's what you do. Watch a little TV. Did you have a TV in your bedroom?
No.
Recall any dreams about anything?
No.
Have you ever had a lot of vivid dreams?
If I wake up during like REM sleep, then I can remember a dream.
Do you remember any of the dreams that you had prior to the shooting?
No.
And some people, I don't expect people to remember dreams over years, but some people can say, yeah, I typically have a dream about X, Y, Z, or I remember a dream about A, B, C.
No, I don't have a repetitive dream.
Nothing that sticks in your mind.
No.
How about really bad dreams or nightmares?
I don't have any nightmares.
Before or since the shooting?
Well, when I was like a little kid, I would have nightmares.
But not since you were a little kid.
Right.
Do you remember what the nightmares were about when you were a little kid?
Just like ghosts and wolves and that kind of thing.
I remember you talking about the nail monsters.
Oh, the nail ghosts.
The nail ghosts, that's what it was, the nail ghosts. When you weren't putting things together, the many tasks that you had to do to get ready, I asked whether you spent much time thinking about the mission, thinking about what might happen, and your answer at that particular time was, no, you didn't think about it because you weren't considering the consequences. You remember that?
Yeah, I remember not considering the consequences.
And we talked from time to time about how much you considered the consequences of various kinds. It seems pretty clear that you were considering consequences.
I considered I would die or get locked up,
Okay.
and it kind of ended right there.
The planning itself suggests that you were considering consequences of how people would act in the theater, how you would control them, how you would prevent them from rushing you.
I wouldn't consider those consequences. That's just kind of tactics and strategy.
All right. Within the tactics and strategy, we talked a little about how close the police station was.
Yeah, like 5 minutes, right?
Yeah. And we talked a little about what led you to choose a venue that close to a police station. Can you reiterate some of that for me or think about that again for me?
I just figured I'd be caught because there was a police presence in that area, but I would still have time to do the mission.
We talked briefly, and I'd like to revisit it, about considering places where you wouldn't be caught, or you'd be less likely to be caught, or you could shoot more people before getting caught. Places not so close to the police station.
Right, part of it was I was comfortable in the movie theater. It's a place I was used to.
Okay. Tell me more about that. I haven't heard about that before.
Well, I did all the recon there to get familiar with the layout, and
I mean, but you could have done recon somewhere else, further from a police station.
true, but I kind of decided that was the place to be.
We talked a little bit about your thoughts about the future. About months before the shooting, how you viewed your future. And one of the things you said was that you sort of left it up to fate to decide your future. You recall that?
That sounds about right.
I'm wondering a little about that because you worked pretty hard in college, which is kind of you shaping your own future.
Right.
You exerting some control over your future. Although you laid back for a year in between college and grad school, you worked pretty hard to get into grad school.
Yeah.
And that's you working to shape your future and not leave it up to fate.
But during the prelims, I left it up to fate.
Okay. During the prelims, leaving it up to fate. A little earlier here, yesterday, the impression you gave was that by the time the prelims came, you weren't going to be a neuroscientist anymore. The mission was set. And the two possible futures were prison or death. The prelims, you didn't bother to study, not because you were leaving it up to fate, but because if I pass, I pass. If I don't pass, I don't pass. Not worth putting effort into because the future is already set. Am I recounting what you conveyed yesterday?
Yeah, it sounds right.
Kind of accurately. That doesn't sound much like leaving it up to fate. That sounds like you have shaped your future rather completely. If you follow the path, if you follow the mission.
I guess what I meant was I was leaving the prelims up to fate and not what was coming afterward.
Okay. It doesn't sound ambivalent at that point. Gee, I don't know what's going to happen. And I understand what you just said about the fate referring to the prelims. I'm now talking about the consequences of the mission. Although we know that at times you did things or hoped for things that might have stopped it, such as the call to the hotline, or the thought that the FBI might stop you.
Yeah.
There really wasn't much ambivalence in your future. It was either you were either going to die or you were going to be arrested. Is that
Or get stopped, which was unlikely.
okay? Yes. And once again, that my impression is that's the way you were thinking at that time, not just today, but at that time.
Yeah.
Or at least that's the way things were, and you had set them up that way. You had created that. You had created those paths.
Yeah.
revisiting just for a second the hating people part of possible motivations for the shooting. At one point, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I asked you, what did the shootings have to do, if anything, with hating people? And you said, just that they make me anxious, and because they make me anxious, I hate them. Do you remember that concept?
Yeah, I remember that.
Okay. You went on to say you weren't mad at anybody in the theater. Let's go back to the word evil, because it comes up in some of the thoughts and writings. You've never said something evil made me do this, or created the mission, or pushed me toward the mission. Is that?
I don't know. I said a lot of stuff, so I don't know.
I don't believe you have ever implied that something evil made you do the mission.
I think that's right.
To quote an old comedian before you were born, the devil made me do it.
No, I don't think so.
That wasn't,
No.
that's not your understanding now or then
Yeah.
that something evil did it. Pull up another thing. What about you being evil? And the evil in you, the evil thing, doing it. Is that a consideration at all?
Well, I think everybody has the capacity for evil.
Let's bring it to you. And I know we're talking about a moral concept and not a legal one necessarily, but everybody has a capacity for evil, fine. But we're talking about Jimmy Holmes. And I'm wondering is it an evil Jimmy Holmes, James Holmes, that does this and has other rationales or things around the edge of it, but at the core, an evil James Holmes killed 12 people, wounded 50-some.
No, I don't think there's an evil James Holmes.
Have you thought about or considered that? Or run that through your mind or at all?
No, not
An
really.
evil James Holmes?
Just the differentiated self part.
I'm not sure what you mean.
That I dyed my hair red and put contact lenses in, and that wasn't the normal me. It's kind of like that portrays an evil me a little bit.
That, your words are, that portrays an evil me a little bit. Can you continue that thought? Talk a little bit about it?
Well, the shooting's unusual for me. I don't usually do things like that.
An evil you came out? How about that?
It's kind of out of character for me.
You just described an evil me. I don't know
Right.
whether you were contemplating that or whether you meant everybody has an evil me inside them, or can you clarify that?
I don't know how to clarify it.
Have you ever thought about the possibility or contemplated that an evil part of James Holmes did that uncharacteristic act?
It sounds possible. Yeah.
Can you expand on that possibility, or how possible, or in what way it sounds possible?
No.
What's going through your mind as you think about it a little bit?
Just that other people could consider that it was an evil me that did the shooting.
I think that's fair to say. Other people could consider that. I'm more interested in what Jimmy Holmes considers.
I don't think there's a separate evil me.
We talked about a few weeks ago the collateral damage. Those are the people who were wounded, etc. And as you planned, the realistic, very high probability that people would get injured rather than killed. Killed is one thing, it accrues things to you, helps with the depression, helps with your value. The wounded folks, or the folks who suffer other kinds of damage, you said as you were planning, I didn't figure the collateral damage had anything to do with me as you were planning. Does that make sense? Do you recall?
Yeah.
The concept? Okay. You have not said at all to me that you got any particular pleasure from the killings.
Oh,
Right?
that's right.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. One of the things you've said is that at some point you said, or you felt, it's done, I'm done, after the killings.
Yeah.
Somewhere, I'm done, you walked out, or you were by your car, and I'm done. I'm kind of interested in the visceral feeling of I'm done.
Relaxed. Not as anxious anymore.
Do you recall being anxious while you were shooting or while you were in the theater?
No, because I planned and prepared it pretty thoroughly.
Before the event started, while you're in the theater doing the ruse with the cell phone?
That was like one time I was anxious when I had to walk out the emergency exit and put the little metal piece so it doesn't close all the way.
At what point, if you can pinpoint it, maybe you can't, were you free of the anxiety? Were you no longer nervous?
When I was standing outside the emergency exit door.
Preparing to go in?
Yeah.
So during the shootings, you don't recall being anxious or worried or...
Right, I was focused and calm.
Do you recall having any feeling of tension at all?
No.
I think we talked about this. Excitement, tension, exhilaration.
No.
Even a feeling of relief while you were doing it, while you were shooting.
Not while I was doing it, afterwards.
And you said about the relief not anxious anymore? What else viscerally, what else did that feel like?
That my muscles were loose. It was kind of like a loose feeling.
I kind of want to say the tension was released, but maybe that's not an accurate description. Does that resonate with what you're saying?
I wasn't really tense. It was just kind of normal, and then got even more loose, less.
One of the places my mind is going, when we talked about this briefly at the hospital, when obsessive compulsive people have a compulsion to do something, there's a kind of tension until they do it, and once they do it, the tension is released, at least for a time.
Yeah.
It may be for seconds or minutes or hours. That was one of the places my mind was going with the relief when it was done. Is that more Reed's mind and not Holmes' mind, or is it resonating with you?
I don't think any tension came back afterwards.
I'm talking about a release of tension, as might happen when a compulsive person does his compulsion, washes his hands, or checks the door or something like that.
That might have happened, yeah.
It sounds like it's not resonating a great deal with you, and I don't want to put my...
No, I didn't feel that way too much.
Okay, thank you. When we talked once before about your worth increasing from 1 to 13, I asked you, in what way are you enhanced? You said, I'm worth 13, whereas a normal person's worth is 1.
Right.
I'm going to turn the lights on. All right, the record should reflect that Exhibit P-TR-1011 has stopped playing. Members of the jury, we're going to go ahead and take our lunch break. Before we do that, I want to remind you that the defendant's statements on this video recording have been admitted only for a limited purpose. You may consider the defendant's statements on this video recording only as to the issues that are raised by his plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. You shall not consider them for any other purpose. Dr. Reed's statements on this video recording, whether as part of questions or responses or reactions, may only be considered for the limited purpose of allowing you to assess the reliability of his examination and to provide context to the statements made in the video recording by the defendant. You shall not consider any statements made by Dr. Reed on this video recording for any other purpose, including for the truth of the content of the statements or as evidence of what he said, as evidence of the content of the statements. Does everybody understand that? And everybody's saying yes. All right, with that, let's go ahead and take our lunch break. Please remember my admonitions related to your conduct when you're not in the courtroom. I'll see you back here in 1 hour, please. Thank you. Please be seated, everyone. The record should reflect that the jury has exited the courtroom now. Just a reminder that all my rulings that apply to Dr. Reed apply just the same on cross-examination. So the same admonishments as before in terms of speaking about capacity to form the culpable mental state or capacity to distinguish right from wrong, as opposed to actually talking about distinguishing right from wrong or actually having formed the culpable mental state. That applies. And then similarly, avoid saying the word lie. If at any point there's a question that needs to be answered by saying that the information provided by the defendant was found to be, or that he felt, his perception was that it was unreliable, then that's how it should be said, not I didn't believe that, or I didn't think that was truthful, or I thought he was lying about that, or he was deceiving me about that. It should be, I didn't find that information to be reliable, and then if somebody asks him to explain, then he can explain as to why, and that can be either on cross or redirect. So the same rules, those rules and the same rules with respect to all my other orders apply. Does everybody understand?
Your Honor, one point of clarification. I presume then that the flip side of that comment on credibility also applies as well, that he wouldn't be commenting on, I found him to be truthful, honest, those kinds of things?
Yes, but it cuts both ways. And if at any point anybody wants me to give that instruction related to credibility that we talked about a couple of days ago, please ask me to do that and I will do that. And so that goes both for cross-examination, Mr. King, and also for redirect. It goes for both. So at any time anybody wants that instruction, all you have to do is ask for it. All right, with that, let's take a break and I'll see you back in an hour. The court will be in recess. Thank you.
Please rise.